that aren't so bad. Eventually with time, we got Purim, the only Jewish holiday where we name the food after the villain, Haman Tashin. But at least they're tasty. And the ones we gave out at the bat mitzvah, my wife ordered strawberry jam and chocolate. And the guys who made it for us said, no, most people like apricot. She said, but my husband doesn't. And I overheard her saying this. And I said, Bats, don't worry about me. She says, no, all the guests are going to get what you like. So everyone had to eat strawberry and everyone had to have chocolate because those are the flavors my wife determined that I like. Which is true. That I do like those. So she ordered the flavor I enjoy. I just want to get this calmed down. Okay. And then, of course, Hanukkah, we got the latkes. So the gastronomic foods have improved since. And we got some good stuff. In fact, I think the very name Purim tells us, you know what we do with this holiday? We Purim. We Purim one l'chaim and we Purim another l'chaim, right? So the name of the holiday expresses exactly what we do. Yeah, for my birthday. I'm born in Shavuos. We got cheesecake. We really went up. We upgraded. Absolutely, I agree with you. So with the Jolly Festival of Purim, we discussed a little bit yesterday, but worthwhile for those joining us today to just do a quick recap and review and then talk about the lessons we're going to discuss more specifically. But I want to look at the anti-Semitism more focusedly today. Yesterday, we looked at the idea of us as a Jewish people overcoming the enemies, and then we will be proudly Jewish, which is what we need more of. Then when we realize that we put our trust, our faith in Hashem, rather than in politicians or even our political entities and groups, etc., because they turn on us, as we've seen so much of recently. But let's look at the levels of anti-Semitism and how we can answer it and how we could deal with it. Haman says he wants to destroy, kill, and annihilate every single Jew, young and old, infants and women, in a single day. We're going to read that in the Megillah. And in the story that we are going to be celebrating here, as we do of Purim, our deliverance from the hands of the evil decree, Haman's gripping, dramatic, and electrifying. You see how things just, what we call blockbuster event, the details of how everything just turns around for our favor, for our benefit, while we thought we're in a perilous way. What's going to be? How are we going to be saved? And it all works out. It all works out for the best. So we need to look at how it came about. But there's one part of the story that I think usually seems largely ignored as we celebrate Purim each year and we remind ourselves of this story. It's covered up by the glamour, the glory of the heroine's rescue of Esther. But when Haman approaches Achashverosh with his plan for genocide, real genocide to kill the Jewish people, he doesn't just request our destruction, but he explains to Achashverosh with convincing proof that the Jewish people are a nuisance and that we should not be tolerated. And he uses very interesting excuses and reasons. He says why they wouldn't even touch the king's wine glass. But if a fly falls into the wine, what does Jewish law say? What should you do if a fly falls into your wine? Flick it out. You can't drink the fly, but you could drink the wine. But if you have wine from idolaters, as the Persians were, you cannot drink it. It's called yayin nesach, right? It's forbidden to drink. So Haman's arguing some very plain, simple facts, which unfortunately we see those very same ideas being expressed today. So when we could look at Haman's claims and analyze how Mordechai dealt with it, then maybe it will remind us how we ought to deal with it today. So what was Haman's claim? He says the Jews are different. They stick to their own set of rules. They refuse to conform to the local culture. They do their own things. Why should we keep them? Aren't they deserving of annihilation? Goodbye and good riddance. And what was Esther's reply, my friends? Ladies, okay, and gentlemen too. Do we find Esther replying to Haman's claims about the Jews? Esther makes a party. She invokes Achashverosh's grace. But the actual argument of Haman Does she actually address it? Goes unanswered. No response. As we scroll through history, we're going to find that claim throughout history to this very day. Go on social media or don't go, because it doesn't help your health. It's very detrimental to my blood pressure, even though, thank God, I've never been diagnosed with any blood pressure issues. But when I watch Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and a couple other anti-Semites these days, my blood pressure goes through the roof. And they make the very same claims. The very same claims that were lobbied against the Jews back then are happening again today. And you have this from Roman historian to Christian friars and to time and again throughout the destruction that hung over our heads of the Jews throughout history, from our expulsions, from the pogroms, from the inquisitions, etc. I don't have to list them all to you because you all know of every single one of these, so many of these situations. England expelled us in the 1100s or 1200s, and France expelled us, and Germany expelled us. And I'm going to look today at one of the answers given by a great Parisian sage, Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. Have you heard of him? Well, we're going to look at one of his texts. If I recall, I think it's in there. And because there was a Jew at the time by the name of Nicholas Dunnan. Anyone heard of him? Nicholas Dunnan was an apostate Jew who sadly caused, our biggest trouble comes from within, more so than without. We know the Candace Owens and the Tucker Carlsons and whoever else, they're anti-Semites, they're external to us. We can handle them. But when it comes from within, when we go online and see a Max Blumenthal, and we see a Ronnie Casseroles, and we see the anti-Semites from within the Jewish people, which unfortunately we have our share of them, that is even worse. And what we'll see is that Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, how he defended the Jewish faith as well, invoking the story of the Megillah. Actually, I don't think he does. He gives answers, but Esther doesn't. That's really the point we want to get to. While Rabbi Yechiel has a disputation, a debate, an argument, he's defending the Jewish cause, Esther doesn't do that. Esther shows up at her party. She tells Achashverosh, this wicked, evil man is trying to annihilate, destroy my people. And Achashverosh takes her word and off with his head. It's interesting. I always make that observation. Achashverosh was a very confused, mixed up man. He killed his first wife Vashti by the advice of his counselor, his advisor Haman. And then he kills his advisor Haman by the advice of his second wife, Esther. So the man vacillates. Well, if you think about Esther, I think that was very well orchestrated, very well planned. That she didn't do it all at the first party. Now, sometimes you might have to do things, sometimes you can't wait. But Esther, I think, needed to test the temperature. Yeah. And make him haughty, get him excited about everything. So let's go straight into the Megillah. Let's look at the messages. Let's talk about it, because there's a clear message I want to get to. That the way to answer anti-Semitism is not by running away, is not by hiding our identity, is not by shoving our Judaism under the rug. Okay, the non-Jews will only respect a Jew who stands up for their own Judaism, which was part of the message that we discussed yesterday, but we'll go into more detail about it today. Our job is to stand tall and proud and with kindness, with respect, with dignity. I was impressed when I watched Mike Huckabee's interview with Tucker Carlson last week in Israel. He was very composed, very respectful, and sometimes we get animated, no doubt, but I think there's a way to handle things. So let's look over here. When we look in the Megillah, we see here how Haman is trying to destroy the Jewish people. He's second in command of the vast and powerful Persian Empire. And yes, right now, again, as a Jewish people, we see the Iranians threatening Israel, threatening America, threatening the world. But let's put that aside. Let's look at the past story, and we'll know that the current, I'm not worried about them today. So let's see it in the Megillah, see it on the screen. We're going to go into chapter 3 of the Megillah. Vayomer Haman HaMelech Achashverosh, Haman said to King Achashverosh, Yeshna am echad mefuzar u'mefereh ben amim. There is a certain people that is scattered and separate among the peoples throughout all the provinces of your kingdom. And their laws differ from all the other people. But they don't keep the king's laws. And therefore, it is of no use for the king to let these people be. And therefore, he requests, if it pleases the king, let it be written to destroy them. Not only that, remember we said Haman was a rich man? And 10,000 silver talents I will weigh out. Eshkoil, I'll weigh out. In the hands of those who perform the work. To bring it into the king's treasuries. So let's unpack this a little bit. Haman's argument is very straightforward and clear. Okay, Jews are different, he says. The Jews are a different kind of people. They are alien, they are outsiders, they're an obstruction to normal society. They don't fit into the rest of the human family. They have their own faith, their own laws. They feel they're superior to the king's laws. And we hear this argument today about Jewish supremacy, unfortunately, being aroused again. And what does Haman say? That we're a nuisance, we're a threat, we're a fifth column, we're a growth, we're an otherwise a different kind of a people. And without us, society would be harmonious and integrated. But we have to be disposed of, because we, the Jewish people, are the problem. And we can look into the Gemara. The Gemara has a discussion about this. When Haman says that their laws are different than all the other people, what does this mean? Says the Talmud, you can see it on the screen. Their laws are different. They do not eat from our food, right? Jews eat kosher. We eat differently. They don't marry our women. Judaism forbids us from marrying out of the Jewish faith. Okay? They don't keep the king's laws. Says the Talmud, they waste the whole year avoiding the king's work with excuses. Today is Shabbos, tomorrow is Purim, the next day is Pesach. Either I'm getting ready for Pesach, I'm cleaning up from Pesach, then I got Lag BaOmer, then I got Shavuos, then I got this holiday, that holiday. There's no time to go to work. The Jews are always busy with excuses why they can't work. Ain't gonna work on Saturday, ain't gonna work on Purim day. Okay? So what's going on here? So Haman is discussing what it is about the Jews that he doesn't like. And he goes further here. Where is it? Oh, I missed that. Sorry. He says, it's therefore no use for the king to let them be. They eat, they drink, they disgrace the throne. Even if a fly falls into the wine glass of one of them, he casts away the fly and drinks the wine. But if my master, the king, touches the wine glass of one of them, that person throws it to the ground and does not drink it. Now, this is a very interesting halacha, where, let me pick it up to you. In Shulchan Aruch it says, it's forbidden to derive benefit from wine of idol worshippers. The same applies when they come in contact with our wine. Okay? How did he know that? Haman. Listen, I guess our laws are not secret. Our books are not pardon? It's true, lots of Jews don't know it. I was at a Sheva Brachas recently, okay? And the hostess, I don't want to give more detail, but the family's involved in stuff that I would have expected they should know this. And the hostess pulls out a Woolworth's bottle of wine and said, look, nice. Look, before I came, they said, everything's kosher here. It all came from a kosher caterer. So I saw what was from kosher caterers and I accepted. You know, it's from Chana's Deli. It was wrapped at the base tin. But then she took out our wine. You know, you need wine for Sheva Brachas. And it was a Woolworth's bottle. And I was shocked. Okay? And I won't go into all the details why I was so shocked. But yeah, I was shocked. I did say, and they couldn't understand. But why? It's just grapes. Okay? It's just grapes. Isn't that kosher? Even grape juice could be problematic. Anything derived from grapes be problematic. Anyways, we won't go into the details about it right now. But the point Haman's saying about the Jews is that they will always stand out. They'll always be different. And who needs them? Why do you need this fifth column in our midst? It's unnecessary. We don't need these people being so different than us. So throughout history, we see these same words repeated over and over and over again. You could see this. Let me put this up here. Who knows how to pronounce this fellow's name? Philostratus? Okay. It's missing a P there. Philostratus, whatever his name is. This was a 3rd century teacher who lived in Rome, in Athens and Rome. Okay, and he summarized the pagan words, the perception of the Jews. And this is what he says. The Jews have long been in revolt, not only against the Romans, but against humanity. And a race that has made its own life apart and irreconcilable, that cannot share with the rest of mankind in the pleasures of the table, nor join in the libations or prayers or sacrifices, are separated from ourselves by a greater gulf than divides us from Surah or Basra of the more distant Indies. Okay, the same argument, in one form or another, you could say is repeated thousands of times throughout history. From the great Roman historian Tacitus, who lived in the 1st century, he said about the Jews, let me see if I put this in here. No. He said, the Jews regard as profane what we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that which we abhor. Towards every other people, they feel only hate and enmity. They sit apart at meals, they sleep apart, and although as a race they are prone to lust, they abstain from intercourse with foreign women. This is what they say about us. Okay, and there's many such other statements. Here's another one. The Jews regarded a crime to kill any newborn infant. The Romans and the Greeks before them killed, as we know, mentally and physically handicapped infants. Infanticide was a common practice in those days. They wanted only perfect specimens of human. So if a child was born with any kind of handicap, any deformity, that child was killed, was murdered. Right? In their minds, keeping such a child was pointless and was unaesthetic. Judaism always forbade killing anyone for any reason. So, to put things into perspective here, or let's go back to the Purim story. The viceroy, Haman, his arguments persuade the king. He offers the king money, and the king says, I don't even need your money. I got enough money on my own. And what was the decree? A decree was issued from the Persian throne, signed and sealed by Ahasuerus, that every Jewish man, woman, child living in the Persian dominance, which extended to 127 provinces, some translated as countries, Me'hod Viat Kush, India to Ethiopia, was all part of the Persian Empire at that time. Now, if you know ancient history, you know that you had a few major empires that controlled vast swaths of land, different countries that they dominated during their times that they were in control. And so this is a vast swath of land that was under the Persian rule. And probably most Jews were in that territory. And they were decreed to be murdered, annihilated, genocided. And then in a very delightful turn of events, the first lady, the Jewish Queen Esther, invites her husband and Haman to this drinking fest. Maybe that's why they called it Purim. Purim, another one. So, as we recall, Esther, from all the thousands of young women who were brought from across the entire empire, were all these different potential candidates to become queen. And who was chosen? Who was selected? None other than Esther, right? The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won more favor in his eyes and grace from all the other maidens, and he set the royal crown upon her. Now, years later, at this wine fest, the king pledges to Esther that he would fulfill her every wish. What does he say? Ad chatzi amalchus, up to half the kingdom he would give her. Now we have to understand this, because if the king offers this, you got to be careful what you ask for, right? Well, she utilizes the opportunity and she makes a very fateful pitch. What does she say? Vatan Esther Hamalka, Esther the queen answered, she says to Ahasuerus, you're willing to grant me half the kingdom? Okay. If I found favor in your eyes, O king, if it pleases the king, May my life be given to me and my petition and my people and my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, to perish. Now, had we been sold for slaves and bondswomen, I would have kept silent. Okay, at least we would exist. But the adversary has no consideration for the king's loss. He wants us all annihilated. So clearly, Esther's attempting to approach this issue from two perspectives, from two dimensions, two sides. There's a personal perspective, and there is an economical one. First, she exposes her Jewish identity. The queen is a member of the people condemned to death. Esther knows that this alone might not do the trick, because Ahasuerus is a very confused fellow and seemed to be not so concerned about the Jewish people. After all, he signed on this decree for their annihilation, right? So what does she do? She continues to discuss rands and cents. After all, that's what the king was, persuaded with logic and cash. By selling the Jews as slaves, what is Esther's argument? She says, at least you would profit far more than by exterminating them. The money Haman offered him is minuscule when weighed against the potential profit of selling an entire nation into slavery. Think about how much more you can make that way. How much did Haman offer? 10,000 gold coins, right? Not gold, silver. Ahasuerus, who hadn't known that Esther was Jewish, is outraged at Haman, right? He has him executed and the decree subverted. He didn't actually reverse the decree. Instead, all he did was, he said, okay, we'll make another decree. The Jews can defend themselves. And shockingly, astonishingly, there were people who still tried to kill us that day, all the way to the next day in the town of Shushan, the capital. So what happens now? After this, Ahasuerus grants the Jews not only the right to defend themselves against anyone who try to harm them, but the entire climate in the Persian Empire towards the Jews is radically transformed, completely changed. Mordechai is appointed the viceroy in Haman's place. The Jews are finally given their liberty, their freedom, their autonomy. But I wonder, Haman did not argue the case for Jewish extermination just on the basis of senseless, venomous passion. He presented what the king considered a sound and persuasive case, didn't he? He said, this is an alien growth, a bizarre people, a separatist nation, supremacists. It's not worthwhile for the king to let these people stay. You need a Jewish supremacy in your midst, a fifth column? Who needs this people in the empire? And I would say that's a very strong argument, isn't it? And Ahasuerus accepts it, and that's how the decree came about, that every Jewish man, woman, and child was to be annihilated. But nowhere in this argument, nowhere in this defense, when Esther is sitting at the party, she doesn't defend the Jewish people, does she? Why did Ahasuerus annul the decree if Haman's claim is still present? Haman says there's a fifth column, there's a bad people. Now you might argue that Esther's charm, her grace, were factors. Ahasuerus says, hold on a second. She's the prettiest woman I know. Why I chose her to be my queen. And if she's part of the Jewish people that I decreed need to be annihilated, then I'm not going to have my pretty wife anymore. Okay, it's a good argument. Maybe that's what changed his heart. But it's clear that Esther does not rely on that alone. And that is why she presents a logical argument about you could have sold us as slaves and we would have accepted that, right? So what's going on here? Why does she ignore Haman's argument, Haman's claim about the Jewish people being such a different, distinct, crazy people? And before we examine Esther's response, or the lack thereof, which I'm going to put on the screen now, let's see how similar terrible accusations were addressed in the history of our people. And we could go to the court of King Louis IX, the King of France. The year was 1240. Okay? So here we have Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. And you have Nicholas Dunnan of La Rochelle. He was a Jew, an apostate Jew, who converted to Christianity in the early 13th century in Paris. Remind me next week to do with you another class about Brother Daniel. I think I did it a couple of years ago, worthwhile repeating it again. Brother Daniel was a Jew, but I think different than Nicholas Dunnan. Nicholas Dunnan was an apostate. He was doing everything to belittle his fellow Jews. On the other hand, here we're talking about Brother Daniel. Brother Daniel was a different story, because Brother Daniel was a Jew who was saved by the church. He was in a monastery during the Holocaust. And after the war, he was convinced to stay as a Christian. And he moved to Israel under the right of return. And a major debate was lodged. Is he considered a Jew? Does he have the right of return, as every Jew does? He doesn't. He professes to be a Christian. And guess who came to his defense of all people? The Beis Din, the rabbis. Now that's peculiar. Why would the rabbis come to his defense if he abandoned Judaism? So come to next week after Purim. We'll do that. We'll do that share next week, and you'll see a very interesting case how the rabbis defended a Christian minister who was born Jewish, that he should have a right to return to Israel, while the Israeli government were the ones who have a much lighter claim to Jewish lineage. They were the ones who argued against it. But that will be next week's discussion. Nobody gets left behind. In fact, a few weeks ago, we started singing a song at our Shabbos table, and it became like a theme at our Shabbos table now. So the song goes like this. You want? Yeah. I'm sure he would have. If you look at Persian history, I've been reading my kids a story called Bustanai. Any of you read it? It's by Marcus Lehman. Heard of Marcus Lehman? Marcus Lehman has a book called Bustanai. It's a novelet. It's about a 100-page novelet. When did he live? A long time ago. And this one, Bustanai, gives you an inkling into Persian history, but a much later time in Persian history. We're talking about a few centuries after the temple's destruction. So probably around the 5th, 6th century, around the time of Muhammad. That's when. And you see, they kill their own family. They're not afraid to kill their own family when they get paranoid that their own sibling is trying to usurp the throne from them. They're not afraid. They wouldn't be afraid to have killed Esther. But obviously, it's a theoretical question because the tables turned. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say so that much amongst Jews, but it did happen. Herod, who was not a Jew, he killed his own wife, killed his own children, killed his own family. Yeah. We have our own rotten apples too, no doubt. And throughout history, plenty of them. And there were Jews that killed Jews. We have a fast they called the fast of Gedalia, the day after Rosh Hashanah. That was because a fellow Jew killed a Jewish ruler by the name of Gedalia ben Achikam. Yeah, he was killed by a Jew named Ishmael. He was killed by a fellow Jew. So I don't want to, focus on that because that's not our discussion today, but certainly that's true. Okay, I won't give you the whole song because I don't want to waste your time. But the bottom line of that song, as Tzipora was saying, is no matter where you may roam, you can always come back home. No matter where you may roam, you can always come back home. I was asked by the Jewish Life magazine to write an article for their Pesach edition soon. So I included a story, which you all know probably, of our Pesach retreat at Sun City, which happened there in 2014, 12 years ago, 13 Pesachs ago. And when I was going to give my shiur in the conference room designated for our shul service, I saw a wedding canopy set up outside. And in walked a fellow who asked, who was a pastor, you could see from his collar. And he says to me, "Are you the Dormani?" So I'm like, "What's a Dormani?" I couldn't figure out what he's saying. Dormani, Germany. Anyways, I worked out he meant rabbi. So I said, "Yeah, I'm the rabbi." Anyways, so he starts quizzing me about Jewish weddings and asking me questions, which I was, glad to answer. I've officiated quite a few weddings over my years as a rabbi. And then he said, "Oh, he's got to go because he has a wedding to officiate outside." I said, "Cool. I've never watched a wedding outside the Jewish faith." And my shiur was at 5 o'clock and this is at 4:30. While I went to the shul to set up and prepare my shiur, I said, let me watch the wedding with his permission. After all, I just spent 30 minutes telling him all about Jewish wedding traditions. So let me see how a Christian wedding is. When I came out, it became abundantly clear to me why he was quizzing me about Jewish weddings. Because this wasn't just a wedding outside. I don't know where I got this idea from. I just said congratulations to the groom. So I didn't say congratulations. I said in our language, we say mazel tov. So he looks at me and like, how do you know I'm Jewish? I'm like, oh, you're Jewish? So he's like, no, I just, Nistama daber ivrit, he said to me. He's obviously he was Israeli, South African Israeli. So it was a funny experience. And now I'm like asking him facetiously, basically, but then why on earth are you getting married by a pastor on Pesach at Sun City? And he shows me his bride who's standing on the other side of the red carpet getting ready to walk across. It was like just before 4:30. And you could see a big cross along her, anyways. So he says to me, Rabbi, he chose to get married at Sun City on Pesach so he could be away from his disapproving family, as distantly away. Did not imagine there would be 200 Jews at Sun City where he was getting married, not outside the shul. This was like not part of his plan. So I told him the line of the song. No matter where you may roam, you can always come back home. You could run, but you can't hide. So he ran away and the shul came after him. The shul pursued him. Anyways, where was I getting at here? The difference between Nicholas Dunnan, who was an apostate Jew, who had abandoned his Jewish faith, not only abandoned it, but began to actually cause a lot of trouble, and he was excommunicated from the ghetto by Rabbi Yechiel of Paris in the presence of the entire community with all the accepted formalities of a cherem. You know what a cherem is? A communication. And he lived in excommunication. He lived in excommunication for 10 years. And though he was still clinging on to his Judaism, he was baptized into the Roman Catholic Church and he joined the Franciscan order. Now, let me tell you, throughout history, we've had more trouble from these types of people. We have a video downstairs produced by the BBC, I believe, called The Disputation. And that happened sometime, similar timing to Nachmanides, Rabbi Nachman ben Moshe, Nachmanides, who was a rabbi in Spain. And there was an apostate Jew there named Pablo Cristiani. Have you heard of Pablo Cristiani? Pablo Cristiani caused a lot of trouble. And Nachmanides was exiled from Spain, even though he was given the guarantee that his life would be spared, that he would remain safe. But he realized he wasn't. And he was exiled and he moved to the Holy Land where he lived his last years. And what happened to him in the Holy Land? Something else crazy. He built a beautiful shul. You could still see the Nachmanides shul that was built in the old city in Jerusalem. And next door to the Nachmanides shul is a mosque. Yeah. How did it come about? The story goes, I only learned the story when I was in Israel recently, and I didn't tell it to you on the videos. This mosque was built by a Jewish person who was in Nachmanides shul, but unfortunately was doing things that got him excommunicated from the shul. Which is why I think in more recent times our sages are not so loose and easy of excommunication, because at the end of the day, it causes more good, more trouble, more harm than good. But this Jew was excommunicated from the shul. His mother, who was wealthy, was upset of what happened. She decided to build a mosque, bigger and more magnificent and glamorous than the shul, right next door to it. She originally pledged the money to expand Ramban's shul, but when her son was kicked out, she was resentful, and instead she built this mosque. And that mosque was always a trouble for the shul. They always made trouble for them. They did their call to prayer. What do they call that? Who knows what it's called? Something like that. And they always made trouble for the Jewish community. And that mosque is still there right next to the shul. Hundreds, centuries old. Nachmanides lived 800 years ago. So it's around the same time that this happens. So in 1238, here's something else. Dunnan's first act of retaliation as a Franciscan was to stir up bands of crusaders to perpetrate massacres of Brittany and other places in which thousands of Jews were killed, and many others who their lives were spared by what choice? By what alternative? Baptism. So he like stirred the pots even more. And unfortunately, that's what happens when our people can be the most kind, compassionate, caring. But when they get turned off, boy, did they get turned off. And in 1238, Nicholas Dunham went to Rome and presented himself before Pope Gregory IX. He denounced the Talmud. And 35 articles were drawn up in which Dunham charged that the Talmud contains virulent acts against the virginity of Mary and the divinity of their Savior. Those same claims are being used today by Candace Owens on her monologues, on her, what do they call them? On her shows, on her podcasts. And the Pope was persuaded that these accusations had merit, and they dispatched transcripts of the charges to the church officials, along with an order to seize all copies of the Talmud. And they were to be deposited with the Dominicans and the Franciscans. And if the examination would corroborate with Dunham's accusations, his charges, then all the books of Talmud were to be burnt. Now again, this is 1238. There was lots of volumes of Talmud. Were they printed? No, there was no printing press yet. Every one of these books of the Talmud were obviously handwritten transcripts. Unbelievable what was to be done. And while at first the order was generally ignored, in March of 1240, the Jews of France were compelled under pain of death to surrender all their copies, all their books of the Talmud. And following that, King Louis IX ordered 4 of the most distinguished French rabbis, including Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, Rabbi Moshe of Kusi, Rabbi Yehuda of Malun, and Rabbi Shmuel ben Shalom of Chateau Thierry, to answer Dunham in a public debate. And so, although the disputants were and are to this day believed by many to have successfully defended Judaism, the actual outcome of the debate was ignored. And a decree was nonetheless passed to publicly burn all the available manuscripts of the Talmud. The same goes with the disputation with Nachmanides. While he won the debate, he lost the battle. He was exiled. And the same thing happened here. The rabbis defended Judaism, arguably successfully. And yet, wagon loads, 24 carriage loads of handwritten manuscripts of the Talmud were set ablaze on June 17th of 1244. And so, my friends, one of the critical texts that Nicholas Dunham cited as evidence that of Talmudic derision of Gentiles. You see today that some of these anti-Semites like to use the word goyim as if we use it in a derogatory way. I could say generally it's not meant to be in a derogatory, in a inappropriate way. But they like to twist it that way. Goyim literally means nations. Even the Jewish people are called goy, a nation, in Torah. Okay? Are there people who use it derogatorily? Maybe. I don't think so. For the most part, not. I mean, maybe if somebody wants to say something, I could think of some context that might be talking about an individual, not necessarily about, anyways, not going into that now. Let's see here what it says. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who authored the Zohar. He says, even the best ones of Gentiles during war should be killed. Ah, look at that. What a bombshell, huh? Nicholas Dunham seems to have found a pretty compelling proof that Jews harbor intense hatred, animosity towards non-Jews. You see? Seems irrefutable. So how would you answer if you were Rabbi Yechiel of Paris? What would you say? So Rabbi Yechiel of Paris takes to explaining the word goy. What does goy mean? As we said here. Okay, so here is his answer. Rabbi Yechiel says the heretic, who's the heretic talking about Nicholas Dunnan, raised his voice and exclaimed, "You are wicked, for you have permitted spilling Gentile blood. Did not the rabbi say even the best ones of the Gentiles should be killed?" Rabbi Yechiel responded, "With your many words, your sins do not cease. And now I'll address your former claims and lay rest to your latter ones. Know that the word goy, which while can commonly be translated as Gentile, has both negative, yes, they could have a negative connotation, but also positive connotation. A positive reference can be found in the verse, what is the verse? I'm just trying to translate it into English. Hallelujah, Hashem kol goyim. Praise God, all the nations. So there you have. Is the word goy in this context negative? Huh? No? Okay. Shabachu kol ha'umim, that all the nations, all the peoples should praise Hashem. And of course, it could have negative connotations. And he even gives an example. I didn't want to give an example, but he says there's a verse that says kol goyim shchechi elokim, that made the what's the meaning of this? That all nations who forget God. Okay, and that it's a negative context. Okay, I'm not going to deny that there are people who have negative words, like I don't know, shiksa. Although shiksa also is not always negative. I think it's a derogatory term; it shouldn't be used. But usually, even when you're using it, it's not necessarily in a negative way. It's talking about a non-Jew. But again, I don't believe we should be using. We don't like when others use derogatory terms about us. We shouldn't be using about others, and that's my opinion about it. Period. But Rabbi Yechiel was saying, yes, the word goyim can be used in a positive context, as he demonstrated, while it could also be used in a negative context as well. And he pointed out that if you look carefully at the words of Rabbi Shimon, he says that it's only during war where this law even applies. And it's a very important detail because it immediately puts this whole hateful sentiment into context, right? Doesn't say that Jews hate non-Jews, even the good ones. He says, if there are people fighting you, even if they may have some redeeming quality, the very fact that they're waging a war against you is proof of their hatred. And as such, it's imperative that you kill them before they kill you. And I'm sure this argument may have been used throughout the war where there were no doubt innocent people killed in Gaza too, although some said there are no innocents. Whichever way you want to look at it, I can't see what the fault of a young child might be. But there are casualties, and Israel did everything they could. We don't have to go into the whole shir now about how Israel and what Israel did to avoid casualties of war, but Israel did. If Israel wanted a genocide and nuke Gaza, it could have easily done just drop bombings, didn't have to go for a ground invasion. And ground invasions are very tricky, and we lost over 1,000 of our own soldiers during the ground invasion, which could have been avoided by doing it from the air. Again, a disproof of the allegations of genocide against Israel, that Israel tried to commit a genocide. But according to Jewish law says that when you're waging a battle, even if there are innocent and good people, it is tragic. We should avoid loss at all causes, no doubt, at all costs. But it happens in war, and that's exactly the context of this point that Rabbi Yechiel was explaining what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said. And he went on to bring a midrashic rendition of this statement by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that clearly demonstrates that he's referring to the Egyptians who were pursuing the Jews, meaning this particular instance that we were talking about was in a particular context of the Egyptians who pursued the Jews. So let's read it here. Here's the Mechilta in Shemais, again relevant to Pesach coming up soon. He took 600 select chariots whose animals were pulling the chariots. If you suggest that these were the Egyptian animals, it already says, and all the Egyptian cattle died during the plague of Dever. Remember, there was a plague in which the Egyptian cattle died. If you suggest they belong to Pharaoh, it says, behold, the hand of God will be upon your livestock that is in the field. If you suggest that it's the Israelite people's property, it says, and also our cattle will go with us. Not a single hoof will remain. Remember when Moshe Rabbeinu was arguing with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, you could take the healthy people. leave the elders and the children behind. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, Binarenu biskenenu nelech. We're going to take our young, we're going to take our old. No Jew will be left behind. Says the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, these animals belong to the ones who feared God. Here is a very beautiful medrash. Medrash says that those who feared God were the ones whose animals were spared because they brought their animals inside, indoors. When Moshe Rabbeinu warned them that a plague was coming, that all animals outside are going to die, they feared God, so they brought their animals indoors. So their animals were spared. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, was those very same people who believed and feared God, and therefore they brought their animals indoors. They were the ones who now pursued the Jews after the Jews left Egypt. And from this, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai concluded, even the best ones of the Egyptians should be killed. So the Medrash is bothered by this question of where the Egyptians got horses to pull their chariots, and it concludes it was those individuals who were God-fearing. Those Egyptians were the ones who joined that chase after the Jews and contributed to their own horses to the war effort of pursuing the Jews into the sea. So it's obvious that even the good ones, even those were rotten to the core. And that's why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells us that they should have been killed before they had the chance to rise up and kill or try to kill us. It would be an act of self-defense. So let's read this here. When Rabbi Shimon declared that even the good ones should be killed, he spoke of war. For if they're coming to kill you, the Jewish law, Habala hargecha, if somebody's coming to kill you, hashkem lehargai, you kill them first. Not kill them after they killed you, because you can't kill them after they killed you. If you kill after, they're not retaliation. This is called preemptive strike. This is the point Rabbi Shimon is saying. However, when the Jews are approached, when the Jews approached the 7 nations of Canaan to wage war upon entry into the land of Israel, they were commanded to first reach out in peace. Certainly, this is the protocol in times of peace. In times of peace, you don't jump to war. Let me tell you something that happened this morning. Not a war, but just an interesting little thing. So we have a deep fryer at our shul that we bought a number of years ago, and it wasn't working. So my wife took it into this place in Corlett Drive a couple of weeks back, asked them to repair it. They called us back. They said it was an easy job to repair. It was just clogged arteries, or whatever you want to call it, clogged pipes. And they cleared it out. It was 350 rand. We came in. I paid the 350. I collected it. I asked the guy if it works before. 100%. Okay, we wanted it for my daughter's bat mitzvah on Sunday. After all, it was a kids' party. And kids liked their hot chips. So we get the deep fryer on, but it's not working. We tried for an hour. We had a lady who works for a catering company try, garnish, didn't work. So we didn't use it. We cooked the hot chips in a pot. All right, that's fine. This morning, I brought it back to the place and I said, well, wait a second. I said, you remember I was here 2 weeks ago, last week, whatever it was, to pick up my piece, and it didn't work. I'm sorry, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I don't know how to use it, but maybe you could just show me or check. That's what I said. The guy takes it, and in 10 seconds, he showed me it's working. I said, I'm so sorry, but I'm glad that I didn't accuse you. He says, no, you would be surprised. He's like, in fact, he said that before. He says, you're a nice guy. I'm like, what do you mean, a nice guy? He says, everyone else comes in here screaming, shouting, yelling, I paid for this machine to be repaired, blah, 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 blah. He says, they freak out at us before we even have a chance to check. So he said to me that I was a nice guy, which I appreciate the compliment. But what's the point here? That the Torah itself says that before going into battle with these nations who occupy the land that God is giving us, reach out in peace. Peace is always the preferred way. Even President Trump, in a State of the Nation address last night, what is the State of the Union? He said it last night. He said, I would prefer diplomacy with Iran, but I know that we're ready for any battle, any alternative, if need be. And so what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says was that if there's a peaceful option, we're not going to go kill innocent people. But if our lives are at stake, then Israel has to do what it has to do. And that we're being condemned for today, but that's the Jewish protocol, okay? But before that, very clearly, it says here, indeed, we consider it patently forbidden to harm, whether financially or personally, even a hair's breadth of the nations among whom we dwell and who protect us. We appreciate that. And we don't harm people nilly-willy as Tucker Carlson likes to portray us. And it goes without saying that the Torah's prohibition on murder applies to Jews and Gentiles equally. So Rabbi Yechiel of Paris valiantly defended this Jewish perspective, right? He concluded that Jews harbor no bad feelings to our neighbors, to the surrounding Gentiles. In fact, we always prefer to live peacefully, to conduct business in a proper way, to contribute our share of society's welfare, etc. Right? And ultimately, he wasn't given a fair chance. Despite his persuasive argument, he didn't succeed in preventing the terrible decree. We know the books were burnt. And again, this is pre-printing press. So these were handwritten, painstakingly written manuscripts, I meant. And to think that anti-Semitism that existed throughout history over and over and over again. But the point I was getting at here was Rabbi Yechiel had a response to the anti-Semitism. This is just one of the points, right? He saw this hateful vitriol from, not Pablo Cristiani, from Nicholas Dunnan, and he defended the Jewish people. What about Esther? Why does Esther not defend us? Why didn't she say anything to counter Haman's claims, Haman's persuasive arguments against the Jews? Did she only rely on her charm and her good looks? Why does she not defend us and say, it's not true that we are a fifth column, that we are different, that we are yada, yada, yada. All of Haman's claims against us. And so, my friends, I want to dedicate the next 15 minutes, the end of our share today, to delve into a talk from the Rebbe on Purim of 1969. In general, the Rebbe's Farbrengens on Purim were always profound. I mean, all his teachings. If you ever have a little bit of time, you want to sit around, and I put on a whole playlist here of videos of the Rebbe about Purim that you could watch right here outside. So if you're looking for something meaningful to do, you can watch these videos and you'll see some of the Rebbe's Purim talks. What was happening around March 1969? There was the space race, right? America was very involved, and the Soviets, right? The Soviets were also, and there was a struggle for civil rights and social freedoms in America. And the Rebbe gave this landmark talk in 770. And the Farbrengen lasted for hours on end. There's videos of it. The Hasidim assembled were privileged to hear a most passionate address from the Rebbe, which you can watch some of the videos here. And the Rebbe spoke with tremendous zeal. And he used the Megillah and the storyline to impress on his Hasidim. And you can watch those videos, the most important lessons of what it means to be a Jew in modern times. And I believe those lessons still ring true today, are still relevant to each and every single one of us as we are here. And the Rebbe began by taking a look at the Purim story. And he notes that the underlying silence in the face of an argument, and asks exactly this question about Esther's silence. Where is Esther's answer? And then the Rebbe went on to explain and said that some questions, it's true, they're resolved by answers. Rabbi Yechiel of Paris gave this answer. But some arguments are refuted by counter arguments, or not with verbal counter arguments. They are demonstrated by the way we live. There are beliefs and notions that don't need dialogue, that don't need debates to disprove them. Reality does the job. And when reality is exposed, then the arguments dissolve to nothingness, because you see they dissipate, they're not true. And for that, you can't speak. You have to prove it with behavior. Haman's allegations fell into that category. Esther responded to Haman's argument with, she says, Haman's talking about us as a Jewish people. Who am I? She says, you want to see a Jew? Look at me. You don't know Jews? Your wife is a Jew, a Jewess. Do I look like the type of person who's threatening the continuity of your reign? I'm in the highest of places, right? And I'm a member of this people. I'm a product of its faith. The whole thesis of Haman vanished into thin air. I'm the very person he wants to destroy. Achashverosh, knowing Esther intimately, she was his wife. He sensed her soul. He touched her grace. He cherished her personality. He adored her glow, her charm. He said he would do anything for her, up to half the kingdom at least. He knew that Esther's character, her values were noble. He saw her dignity, her personality, pure and dignified. And he chose her, as we know, from all the others. So therefore, as the Megillah tells us this whole story, how Esther was taken and how she was the one selected. But Achashverosh never realized that she was Jewish, that she was a daughter of the Jewish people, right? That she was a product of the Jewish faith. What marrying out of the faith? In this case, she had to save her people. This was an act of saving her people. But her point was, she doesn't have to say to Achashverosh, the argument's not true. She says, look at me, I'm your wife, okay? You're going to listen to this guy, his accusations against me? Preposterous. You chose me of all the people because you know my character. We've been married for some time. You know exactly what I'm about. And when Achashverosh discovered that his own wife is a member of the people that Haman wants to annihilate, everything else, he realized all the rest of Haman's arguments are false. You know, I saw a video the other day of a guy gets pulled over by the cops for speeding. The cop says, give me your driver's license to him. He says, but it's in the glove compartment with my gun. The cop says, where's the key to your glove compartment? He says, it's in the back of the trunk with the corpse of the guy I just killed. The cop says, I'm calling for backup. Calls for backup. His superiors come. They want to arrest the driver. They said, the other cop says, you have a corpse, a dead body, a gun, a rifle. What's with you? He says, yeah, I bet that cop also told you I was speeding. He's lying. You going to believe him? You going to believe Haman now that he makes these claims against the Jews? The guy's a liar. And Esther's day-to-day life is what demonstrated, it spoke louder than any argument could achieve, the absurdity of Haman's arguments that the Jews threaten society. So looking at Esther, sensing her refinement and her beauty, Achashverosh understood that this alien nation who lived by another code, they shouldn't be loathed, they should be respected. Yes, they may be different, but is different something to despise? It's an otherness that elevates the other nations, it doesn't threaten them. We're different, but this otherness has the power to inspire other people, that we should love deeper, that we should live deeper, that we should be a light unto the world, right? And when the Persian king learned that Esther's special qualities were a symptom of her Jewishness, he did not need to hear anything more. That was it. He got it. The last thing he needed to worry about was Esther, who lived in his palace, was she the one who was plotting to kill him? Was she the one conspiring against him? She was a blessing, and the Jews were a blessing. And therefore, as we see her in the Rebbe's words, I'm just going to read some of them to you. He says, to refute Haman's argument, Esther didn't need to do anything more than demonstrate that the claim it is not worthwhile for the king to maintain them is not true. Esther indeed proved that this was the case. The Jews may be dispersed among the nations and keep to their own laws, but you, Achashverosh, can see for yourself the claim it's not worthwhile the kingdom is not true. Haman claimed that it's not worth for the king to maintain them. Esther answered, you should know that this is the very nation I come from. That's not the case, right? We could keep reading the words, but the whole point is, and I think the lesson for our times is clear. Sometimes Jews think that by hiding our otherness, by hiding our identity, we'll get approval of the world. Let me tell you, the facts prove otherwise. Assimilation, hiding our identity, that's what assuages anti-Semitism. You talk about these anti-Semites who are lodging claims against Jews, but who are they talking about? They're talking about the Epsteins. They're talking about they're talking about these fellows who are embarrassment to our people. Nadovs. Pardon? That's true. But the point we have to realize is, and in fact, the Medrash tells us the Jews of Shushan were very assimilated, which is why they attended King Achashverosh's party and ate his non-kosher food. Okay, they were happy to partake in it. And even according to some who say that the food is kosher, they were trying to fit in. Okay? So if they were trying to fit in, the Jews made every effort to assimilate into the culture. They want to be part of the party. They want to be cool. They want to be hip. And that did not deter Haman from believing that despite all the Jews' compromises and attempts to not be so Jewish, that they were still strange, distinct, and different. And this pattern has repeated itself over and over throughout the milieus of history. Never in history has assimilation solved the problems of Jew hatred. Think about the Jews in Germany who were more German than the Germans. Did it save them? Jews in Germany were very highly assimilated. They were fully integrated into the mainstream society. But that was the very country that was the place where that was the worst for Jews, where the worst Jew hatred in history was espoused, right? And the Jews in Germany had an expression. They said, Jew at home, German on the street. I'd say, Garnish geholfen, the atoite bankes. Verstehst du ein bisschen Yiddish? What did it help them? Okay? And this is the thing. They were very German, exactly. And it didn't help them. And Tolstoy wrote about the Jews. He said, the Jew is the religious source, spring, and fountain out of which all the rest of the peoples have drawn their beliefs and their religions. The Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. At the same time, as while we try to assimilate, it doesn't help us. But when we stand out, we're admired. And there's so many others who looked at us and looked up to us. And therefore, we have to remember the message to us today. The solution for the Jewish people is not to deny our uniqueness, is not to hide our identity. That will never work. Rather, we should embrace our Jewishness. Just like Esther, okay, for a time she had to hide her identity and then she revealed it. And maybe that's why it's called Megillas Esther, the revelation of the hidden. And this is something that we have to do, that when came the right time, Esther realized it's time to reveal her identity. Rather than be ashamed or guilt-ridden, but rather we should be a source of admiration and inspiration to all of humanity, to all the people around us. And that, I think, is an important message and lesson that we could all take. That just like Esther, my friends, the presence of a Jew is permeated by the love and dignity of Torah. What makes us Jewish? When we live Jewishly, when we live by the teachings of Torah, by the values of our mitzvahs. And then we will see that when we live with integrity and sanctity and dedication to God's will and modesty and moral code and sensitivity to all the people around us and to all of the noble and dignified ideas of living a Jewish life and love for humanity. In fact, that's our next campaign that we're going to see here. We have a big campaign launching soon on Avas Yisrael. It starts at home. It starts with your fellow Jews, but that love is for all of humanity. And that will refute all the arguments of Haman, more than any other debate, more than any disputation can ever. Whatever those could achieve, we see the difference. While Rabbi Yechiel of Paris may have won the debate, they still burned all the books of Talmud. While Nachmanides may have been victorious in that disputation, he wasn't, because he was expelled, exiled. Esther, she proved what a Jew is. Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who was a great master of the Musar movement, you know what he once said? If a Jew doesn't make Kiddush, Kiddush to sanctify himself by maintaining a distinctly Jewish lifestyle, making Kiddush Friday night is unique to our Jewish faith, then he says the others will make Havdalah. You know what's Havdalah? Havdalah is the ceremony we say on Saturday night to differentiate between the holiness of Shabbos, the sanctity of Shabbos, and the mundane days of the week. Said Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin that if the Jew doesn't make Kiddush, then the Gentiles will make Havdalah. Havdalah meaning they'll be able to distinguish. They will show us how different we are if we don't see it on our own. And that is the message to all of us. The message is clear that the best and only way to show the nations of the world that we are not only worthy of, that we are not worthy of annihilation is by sticking to our faith. And a Jew who panders to all the modern cultures will be stamped out by it. And so if we could stand tall and proud and exhibit our faith, our virtue, then the nations of the world will learn to respect us, to honor us. And that is, I'm not even looking for their honor. Just let us live. Let us live peacefully. That's all we need. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, true. Okay, these were some other points I wanted to make, but we're going to conclude here now. Oh, here. No, it's talking in general about Jews in Germany. German Jews converted to Christianity. They did all kinds of things. That's Fritz Haber as an example. I didn't go into all the detail today because I skipped a lot of points. I was going to talk about him as an example. Here are some other examples from Nietzsche. Pardon? Tolstoy, yeah, right here. Here's Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy said, the Jew is the religious source, spring, and fountain of the rest of the peoples have drawn their beliefs and their religions. But I cut it out. I mentioned it, but I don't want to spend too much time on that because our time has come up. But that's the final message to all of us. Thank you all for joining today. Look forward to see you all today. Tomorrow, don't forget, you got your physio with Karen in the morning, and you have a shiur. It's all connected after that. And then is it next week that Dr. Stern is back? Next week, the week after. I'll double check, confirm with you. I'll confirm with you. All right. Zakazant, everybody. Enjoy.